Symmetry, proper spacing, and white space. We love symmetry. It's in our blood and we're drawn to it like kids to mud. I'm sure you've seen lots of programs on the Discovery or History Channel where they say our ancestors had the same passion for symmetry as we do. That's why so many monuments and even cities have it implemented in their design. The same can be applied in web design. There's a saying that you should like a site even if you see it out of focus from across the room. That can only be achieved through an appropriate colour scheme, a great layout, and proper spacing. And that layout must bring balance to a design in order for the website to feel right. Notice the emphasis on feel. If you're a freelancer, I'm sure you've heard a client say at some point something along the lines of, "Well, it's okay, you've followed the brief, yet somehow something seems off, but I can't put my finger on it." Most likely, this is the culprit: balance. To balance a design, we need to use proper spacing between all elements and position them accordingly, so the site is as symmetric as possible. This is why we're actually using a grid system made out of columns with exact spacings, rather than just approximating things. The principle is this: maintain consistent and adequate spacing throughout the entire design. Sounds simple enough, yet it requires a very meticulous hand. The first thing we need to do is understand what are the best tools for the job. First, we have the arrow keys in conjunction with the shift key. You need the move tool active for this, of course. Press any arrow key once and you'll move the layer by 1 pixel. Add shift and you'll move it by 10 pixels. This allows us to quickly space elements in increments of 10 pixels. There's no limit to it, so you can space things out very quickly with this feature. Let's jump over to a new tab to see things better. The idea is you move one square next to the other one until it snaps into place, until it touches the other one. Then you use Shift to space them out. 3 times means 30 pixels. It seems overly simple, but it's actually a technique I constantly use. To use it effectively, we must first make sure we have our smart guides enabled. Move any layer around and you'll see pink lines appear. Those are your smart guides, and you should always have them on. Go to View, Show, Smart Guides, and see if that's checked. These will help you position your elements perfectly, and it's very reliable in older Photoshop versions. Another thing you should know in regards to proper spacing is how you measure your distances. I work with the marquee tool non-stop. This is one of the fastest ways to measure distances because it instantly shows your coordinates. W stands for width, and H for height. Of course, we have this new measurement feature where we hold Control and hover over another layer to see the distance between them. That's fantastic, but keep in mind this is available only in Photoshop CC 2014. You can find out more about it in its dedicated section in the Photoshop version comparison lecture. The alignment tools up top also help us quite a lot with our spacings, but since we just talked about it, I won't get into it again. So those are our main tools for measuring and spacing things out. The arrow keys in conjunction with the shift key, the marquee tool, the latest measurement tool available in CC 2014, and the alignment tools in the top panel. To better illustrate how important it is to have precise spacings, we'll see some examples where you have to choose which element draws you in, which one you prefer. This is our first one. Which one of these buttons do you prefer? 1 or 2? Choose fast, there's no thinking here, you've got to act fast, so 1 or 2. Okay, if you chose 1, then you're on the right track, and that's because the text inside the button is perfectly centered, both horizontally and vertically. The one on the right is actually offset by 2 pixels to the right and to the top. This is a pretty exaggerated example, believe it or not. In general, you'll be dealing with only a 1 pixel difference, which will be harder to spot, but as time goes by, you'll become a regular Hawkeye at it, for all you MASH fans out there. Let's go to another example. It's the same situation here. Which do you choose? Again, the one on the left has perfect spacings, while the one on the right is a bit sloppy. Let's take the marquee tool and see what we have on the left form. For the headline, we have 33 pixels on the top side. On the left, we have 33, and on the right side, 33. But if we select the headline layer, and then hold Control while hovering over our white background, you can see it's 32 pixels all over. If we go to the edge, we can see why that happens. Photoshop gives this text layer 1 extra pixel to the side. That's no big deal since we can clearly see we have consistent spacing throughout it. The difference lies within the tool you use to measure it. In general, you'll use only one, either the marquee tool or this new feature in Photoshop CC 2014, so for that reason you won't have inconsistencies. Let's check out the call to action button. I'll use the control method from now on since it's a bit faster. Yep, 33 pixels on each side. How about the distance between the fields? It's 20 pixels, absolutely everywhere. Between them, between the header and the first field, between the last field and the button. So even though this design isn't anything magnificent, it's correctly laid out. If we jump onto the right form and use the same technique, we can clearly see lots of variations. The headline has an empty space at the top of 24 pixels, but if we check the button, we can see that has only 20 pixels. The same goes for the gap between the headline and the first field. That's a whopping 28 pixels, but that value doesn't show up again. This is something you have to first master before you move forward. Like I previously mentioned, these aren't incredible designs, yet because they're laid out, they're not terrible either. By simply following these rules of symmetry and consistency in spacing, you set yourself up for success. You create a solid base on which you can then build. This is one of the most common mistakes designers make, and it's actually one of the easiest to correct. It's not particularly hard, it's just a bit boring. But once you understand the power of it, you'll have no choice but to do it, and with the help of the tools I presented, you'll be flying through them in no time. It's far more difficult to repair an out-of-sync design, so the secret is to create them perfectly from the start. Directly related to symmetry, proper spacing, and design balance is white space. It's also called negative space, and it simply refers to the empty room you leave in your design. Some might say that's lost space, but as you'll see in most cases, less is more. Apple is a good example of white space use. I'm not a big fan of the brand, but the site is a good studying point. As you see, there's lots of empty room. A magazine editor in the 90s would go crazy from seeing this so-called wasted space. They'd much rather have the site look like their front cover of their magazine. That may work in that particular field, but in web design, things are very different. White space has a very important role. It creates an elegant look to the site. It lets the custom graphics shine and become the hero of the page. Going back to Apple, look at the copy. By the way, copy is another word for text, just in case you aren't familiar with the term. Look at how little text we have. This is white space in action. When we remove it, let me pull up a design without generous spacing. Look at what happens. Disaster. All of a sudden, the typeface isn't that interesting, is it? The product images start to lose their premium feel, don't they? That's how vital white space is to a design. This has always been an important design principle, yet in most media formats we've been accustomed to lots of crowded content. Think of magazines from 5 to 10 years back. They were packed full of info because somebody probably thought they'd lose money if they didn't use every single square inch on the page. Again, that might have worked for them, but these things don't translate into our design field. When you go upscale, you'll usually see a more refined touch and subsequently lots of white space. Look at the Mercedes ads, for example. The car, which is the actual content, is the hero, and thus it occupies the majority of the space. The rest of it is just there to support the hero. A background that doesn't try to take the spotlight, a bit of copy that informs without being in your face. This is a good example. Don't think about white space as literal white space. It can be any colour. What matters is you leave sufficient room in your design. This is the complete opposite of clutter. Lots of clients have adopted this term, cluttered, and for a bit of time I didn't know what it was. To put it simply, it means crowded. This can be seen in lots of places, from copy to button design to complete websites. Let's have a look. Which of these two buttons do you prefer? You should be pointing to the one on the left, since the text doesn't occupy most of the button real estate. Yes, it's a call to action, and yes, it has to stand out, yet by making the text inside it too big, we lose valuable aesthetics points. Regarding copy, this is going to be discussed a lot in our typography chapter, but to illustrate the point, choose one or two. Which one do you prefer? Which one would you rather read? The answer is pretty obvious because of the intelligent use of white space. By increasing the line height, the text seems more manageable, more approachable. So I think it's quite evident that the space between our text lines isn't wasted at all. In fact, it brings lots of value to our design. You could argue that we gave up on some of our content. Fair point. On the other hand, would you have read that? How about most users? Everything has to have a clear purpose. Let's take a look at an example website. This is a great one. Now to play the other side, we'll take it like this. The whole menu could have been compacted to 1/5 of its current size. Look at all that empty space everywhere. No, that won't go. We have to fix it. We're losing precious space. The fold. Where's the fold? So much content underneath the fold. We have to fix it. How could we launch a site like this? And all this drawn out text. Damn if I get my hand on that designer guy. Plus I can barely see the text, so we should make it much bigger, but take up less space. And we need even more text because of SEO, because I want to be #1 on Google. Google wants lots and lots of text so it can be indexed, so yeah, more text everywhere. Now after a session like this, you'll most likely end up with a design that looks, well, you be the judge. On the flip side, you'll hear me say Theme Forest is the porn of web design due to its incredible attractiveness, yet unrealistic layouts. Most designers understand the need for good white space, but sometimes they take it overboard. If 10 is good, then 20 must be great, right? This principle does not apply to web design. Let's take a look at an example. This is not an extreme one, yet it's too much. The footer, for example, is, well, too empty, and I'm not being sarcastic. I believe this truly is a wasted opportunity. While I understand this wants to be upscale and luxurious, I don't believe a footer should look like that. The same can be said about the header. In our quest for minimalism, we sometimes get too ahead of ourselves. Looking at a post, we see the same line being followed. This is highly unreasonable because you'll most likely never come across a project like this in your design career. Of course, there are exceptions, but we have to be prepared for those cases we're going to get 90% of the time, not for a measly few percent that's reserved for the ultra-exclusive anyway. So, to sum it up, white space, symmetry, and consistent spacing are critical fundamentals you need to master before you move forward. Without this strong starting point, your designs won't be aesthetically pleasing, no matter how hard you work.